All right, it's time for part 2 of this game thing that we've been up to. Let's see what we get this time. 15. That is Sakamoto desu ga. All right, let's check it out. So in the process of making this latest finish or fail video, things got a little bit weird and out of hand. Basically, the first two shows that I watched were Sakamoto desu ga and Mayoiga, and with both of those shows, I had felt that I had a little bit more to say than I wanted to say in just a vlog, because when I do these vlogs, I tend to not be very precise in my language, and I think these work a lot better for like the laying around series, where I'm just like reacting to stuff that happens after each episode and like offering random comments as opposed to trying to do like a review. Because my rambling review videos, I tend to, after doing them, wish I had said certain things differently or been more careful with my words in certain cases. Some shows, it's not a big deal. Some shows, it's a much bigger deal. And with those two shows, I felt like I wanted to say something very specific, and I didn't want to just ramble into a camera for 20 minutes. So, after doing the Mayoiga, after watching Mayoiga, I decided that what I would do is do an unscripted rant into the microphone. So instead of like a rambling vlog where I'd have to try to make up words really quick, I could take my time, think of what I wanted to say with each sentence, but I didn't have enough to say about the show to like write an analysis of it. So, I wanted to do something right in the middle ground. And so I did, and then after listening to it back, I thought this might be good enough to turn into an actual video, but I just wasn't completely satisfied with it, and it came out longer than I wanted it to be. Like, it was like 13 minutes long, and I wanted it to be something quick and easy because I don't think the points I was making were that interesting that it deserved to be a whole analysis. So then I thought, what if I did the entire finish or fail in that style, where each show I just, do an unscripted rant about it into the microphone and then release it more podcast style. So then I did the same thing for Sakamoto, and in that case, it actually did come out good enough that I thought it could be one of my videos, and so I had Devu edit that one, and that's the video that should have come out slightly before this one. So there's no Sakamoto review in this, it's on the main channel, but the Mayoiga one is still in here. And then the problem is that every single show I watched after that, I didn't feel the same way. I didn't feel that I had so much to say that I wanted to word it carefully. It's much more just impressions. I don't know what it is about those two shows that I really wanted to do like a review of them. And then everything after that, I kind of felt like I didn't need to at all. I just wanted to share my thoughts on it. So I'm going to vlog about all the other shows, but first we're going to get this 13-minute Mayoiga rant that will not have video, which, there's time codes in the description if you want to skip that and get to the next show. So anyways, on with the video. Okay, that last roll went well, so let's see how this one goes. 16. That's Mayoiga. Oh man, this is gonna be an adventure. Well, let's get to it. Mayoiga was fucking weird, and I, for one, really enjoyed it. There seems to be a lot of contention and confusion over what Mayoiga actually was, along with scores going all over the place, and largely down. But personally, I think this show is being pretty broadly misunderstood. Mayoiga is a farce. The show does not take itself seriously at all. There are dramatic things that happen in the story, and to the characters, the situation often seems to be very serious, but the show treats these characters like they're a bunch of idiots. The overall tone of the series is constantly calling attention to how silly and unbelievable and ridiculous the things that are happening are, and it goes so far as to hilariously undercut the tension of its most scary scenes, and even totally undercuts any of the drama that would be happening in the big climactic episodes by having most of the characters just not take it seriously. Personally, I thought this was pretty clear from the beginning, when the show started with a bus full of psychopaths, all introducing themselves by internet handles, and then breaking into a song about an unfortunate hippopotamus out of nowhere. What the hell are we getting ourselves into here? And throughout the show, like a third of the dialogue is outright jokes. Every time all of the characters would get into one place and just start chattering back and forth, a lot of what they say is totally absurd and out there and hilarious because these characters are crazy people. The whole setup of the show kind of teases you by showing you some characters who are obviously outright insane, and then a bunch of others who seem kinda normal, which leads you to wonder, okay, what's that guy's deal? Because obviously everyone who's on this bus has to have some kind of crazy weird deal, so a lot of the tension of the show is just wondering who's gonna be the real craziest person there. And of course, as the show goes along, we realize that everyone is the most crazy person there. Now, I do think that Mayoiga has some big problems, and I think that these problems are a part of the reason that the show is not well understood, because I think that if you don't get what the show is going for, and then you also have these other problems with the show, then it just looks like a total clusterfuck. It seems to me like the team behind this show had a really strong idea of the premise and characters, and they really understood how it was going to start and how it was going to end, but getting from point A to point B was kind of a messy road. Mayoiga's biggest problem is that it doesn't have an interesting story, and what it does have is a bunch of twists and turns that don't really have much of any impact and are often just kind of goofy and not in a big enough way to be memorable. Once we actually start learning what's really going on, it opens up some avenues to some really good character development, and the story gets so batshit crazy that it becomes really entertaining. And honestly, I wish they'd made a lot of the reveals earlier into the script, as opposed to leading us on for such a long time with twists and turns that weren't really all that interesting. In the end, the concept that emerges in the later episodes was actually so interesting and fun that I kind of wished the show was longer and went into more depth about those things. It makes sense to me that this show is only 12 episodes because even though they had a giant cast, they obviously didn't have a lot to go on in terms of story. So if they'd stretched it out to 26 episodes, it would have just meant more stringing us along and not really giving any answers, because the most interesting stuff was the big reveals towards the end, and getting there was kind of boring. I also think it's understandable that there would have to be more characters in the story than necessarily would be explored by it, and I think it was a good decision to have such a large cast with such a good variety of characters so that nobody would just feel samey or like they were all the same level of crazy. It was nice that some people were more normal and just trying to escape more normal seeming issues, whereas other people were clearly way off the deep end, and having that whole gradient of personality types really helped to sell those early episodes of the show. But as it goes along, a lot of those people kind of just feel like they're there for no reason other than to have that many people, and they don't really get to do anything in the story, which is kind of a shame, because a lot of the more normie characters were the ones that I kind of wanted to know more about, and those are the ones who end up just kind of getting written off in the later half of the show. Now, I did find the way that all those characters were written off to be really funny, and I loved the way it was handled in the end, and I really liked the overall message that they were going for with it, but it's just a shame that so many of these characters are so unmemorable and don't really get to do anything, and outside of having really spectacular character designs, are completely forgettable. And man, I adore the character designs in this show. I think especially all of the main cast are just gorgeous. I think the character designs are super great, and in a way, I wish I got more out of every character in the show, just because characters with designs this rich should also have personalities this rich so that they can be best girl. And I do think that the production of this series and the general animation directing was a little bit weak. There's too many scenes where characters are just kind of standing around or just not animating all that well. I think that while the character art is really solid and characters are almost always really gorgeous, that's also because they're often not moving. And then when they do move, it can be a little bit jarring, and not always in a good way, where, you know, as I said, this show is clearly supposed to be funny, and some of those scenes could be funny because of the animation, but other times it just felt like it was stumbling over itself and like it just wasn't that pretty to look at. Kinda like Higurashi. I think what makes Mayoiga work, at least for me and those who think that it did work, is that putting a group of crazy people into a lost city where virtually anything could have been happening there is a great way to come up with almost any kind of weird, crazy plot and have it all kind of make sense. Like, the whole time you're always wondering, are these people just enacting these crazy things because they are crazy, or is it because there's magic going on here, or you don't really know because it could be anything in this situation. Everyone involved is so unhinged that it could have really been anything. And of course, what it really is that all of these crazy people are being haunted by their own crazy pasts. Now, Mayoiga does pull a big bait and switch over the course of the series, which only adds to the confusion even more of its farcical premise, but the real bait and switch is that it's not a horror series at all. And by that I mean, at first it seems like a horror comedy where each of these characters is probably going to have some kind of gruesome death and it's all going to build towards this big insane climax, but the reality of it is that no one dies at all, and it's really building towards a big heartwarming climax, and that's kind of the biggest joke of the whole thing. In the early part of the series, we're given reason to believe that certain characters are dead, only for them to show up later more alive than ever. And I don't think they could have spelled out their intentions more perfectly than by having the fucking DJ guy be the one who comes back for the big dramatic reveal. Cause he's totally the guy who would die first in a horror movie, as he does here. He's kind of perverted, a little rapey even. We don't even have to mention that he's the most dark-skinned character. And so when he dies first, it just seems like, well, of course, that's what happens in a horror story. But then he not only comes back, but he's the one who delivers all the big game-changing exposition while doing it all in his goofy, stupid DJ persona. Like, the most important scenes in the show are delivered by a guy who's like picking his nose in the background while doing it. And then the big terrifying disaster that all the people face is that they become lazy. The whole show builds up these monsters that are chasing everyone, but then it turns out that the monsters are really just a part of themselves, and avoiding the monsters just makes them into lethargic layabouts, and that's what they're in danger of. The real danger of this village is not that they might die, but that they might just become hikikomori neets and not care about anything. This show has some pretty on-the-nose social commentary in that regard. Essentially, the message of the show is simply, you have to face up to your personal demons and take them on head-on. If you fail to do that and you just get over your past and just kind of stop thinking about it and end up being like content with your life, then you're just going to become a boring old man who's happy about everything. And what's funny is the show like says that doing this makes you like lose your humanity, but it doesn't really necessarily present it as a bad situation to be in, other than that you grow old super quick, which to me seems like a metaphor for the idea that if you become content, you don't care about what's happening in your life anymore. It's kind of like if you just find your place at a regular 9-to-5 job and you're okay with it and you live the rest of your life that way, you'll feel like you've grown old in no time flat. I believe that's what the metaphor here is. Whereas those who embrace their pain and continue to fight and struggle for the rest of their lives will always feel alive and human and like they're always going for the next goal. But is that really the life you want? Well, that's why we end up with an even split between those who want to leave the village and those who want to stay at the end of the show, which came off really funny to me, but I mean, this is a comedy show. Mayoiga was deeply fascinating for me because I do think it works on a lot of different levels. I thought that some of its more emotional moments were actually pretty gripping, and the plot, once you fully understand it, is so maddening that it just totally works for me. But I do think that the show lags pretty hard in the midsection, with the story that doesn't really go anywhere and way too much groupthink on the part of the characters, where everyone just kind of jumps to one conclusion and then they all do that thing for the sake of the plot. Now, it would have been annoying if the entire show was everyone constantly arguing, as they did for some of that midsection of the show, but that's kind of just a problem that's inherent in this scenario. Having all of the characters always be kind of on the same page leads to it always just being a matter of who agrees with what's going on and who doesn't, which doesn't really make for an interesting conflict. They probably could have done a lot more with having a huge cast of characters all butting heads over something, and I think a show like Infinite Revias really shows how that could have been done really well, and that show did have 26 episodes to explore this fully, but while I do think that this show could have explored the things that it did explore in a much better way, and it could have been more memorable and maybe had some more fleshed out characters, overall it was such a fun time, and the ideas that were there were interesting enough that I still enjoyed the show. I don't think it's amazing, but I do think it's worth checking out, and definitely worth thinking about beyond just writing it off as a weird, so bad it's good show, because it's totally doing that on purpose. I don't even want to get into the fact that it's directed by Tsutomu Mizushima, who is a comedy director and has done a lot of the best comedies of the last 10 years. Or that even he himself said that to him, horror and comedy are pretty much just two sides of the same coin, and that the other, more horror-centric shows he's done were also pretty fucking goofy. But honestly, I don't think you need to know any of that to recognize the truth. If you really don't think this is a comedy, go rewatch the scene where Hyoketsu no Justice falls off a cliff, and then everyone back at the house is like trying to remember his name, and they just keep coming up with different stupid names for him until one of them just starts calling him ass. If that wasn't a hilarious scene that was obviously meant to be funny, then I don't know how to help you recognize this stuff. Let's see what happens. 12. Boku no Hero Academia. Alright, been getting lucky rolls today. So, Boku no Hero Academia. This was a pretty fun show, although so far I don't think it's gotten far enough into the story or just done enough things to really leave a huge impression on me. This show had a phenomenal start, I think. It did a great job of endearing me to the main character. His struggle was, just really presented well, and I love the idea of him as like a guy who grew up without powers, and everyone else in the world has powers, and now he's been granted a power by someone thanks to hard work and guts, and he has to basically work harder than everybody to achieve his goals. And even now, because he can't control his powers because he's never had them before, he still has to struggle with that while being, when he can use them, one of the most powerful guys out there. It's a fun concept. The show does the very typical shonen formula. It's very Naruto Chunin exams feeling, or like, any stuff in that vein, where it's like a bunch of young characters learning to use their powers, slowly introducing greater threats from outside. It's going to make them have to mature very quickly so they can fight these bigger bad guys, It's very formulaic, and I will say that so far, my biggest problem with it is that the main character is the only one who's gotten any real development. We've been introduced to a whole lot of other characters, and there's been some for his rival, but like the main girl, would love to see anything else about her, any of the side characters, even the guy with the glasses, who's really fun. There's a lot of really fun side characters who just haven't gotten to do anything yet. It's mostly just been about the main guy and his mentor, who's great. The two of them make a great combo, and they're both great characters in their own right, but even with them, like, I kind of got the point in those first 3 episodes, and since then it's just kind of been reiterating on the same characterization points. So, like, and the thing is, this show, it expands on the material. As opposed to trying to cram a lot into a small space, it's actually been adding more stuff into the manga, and I think most of that stuff is very welcome. I think it has a great soundtrack, overall great presentation. It's not all out with its animation the way that other Bones shows can be, like Mob Psycho 100 this season. But it's, it looks solid, it feels good. It hasn't done enough yet, it ends so early with this season. Now, they've already announced they're making another season. I don't know how far the anime will go. I don't know if it'll have an ending, if they would make one up, or if they would just, because with Bones, you never know what you're going to get out of a shonen manga adaptation, because they used to do them where they just had them end, like they made up their own endings, for the original Fullmetal Alchemist, for Soul Eater, and people usually hated those endings, and then they did Brotherhood and stuff, and then now they've gotten into this more rhythm of like, we'll adapt 13 episodes and then see how it goes, and maybe we'll do more later, but they do like to make changes whenever they adapt manga. They just did Blood Blockade Battlefront last year, and they changed a lot of stuff. So, like, I won't be too surprised if they do make up their own ending, or if they do something different for Season 2. But this is a long-running Shonen Jump manga, so there's no reason to imagine that it couldn't go on forever, other than that Bones doesn't really do that. So I'd be interested to see how long this will go for, and if it has more in store for us than just Shonen du jour, which it does decently enough, but like I need a little more than just the basics in order to really get into it. So that's how I feel right now. Okay, I haven't actually recorded vlogs of the last 3 shows yet, but we're just gonna keep this gravy train a-rolling. 25, that's Sansha Sanyou. Cool. I can do that. The next show I finished was Sansha Sanyou, which I had also seen the first 3 episodes of, and this one,
I really praised it at the start of the season. It was probably my favorite first episode of the summer season. I talked about it in the Weavecast, and I was like really happy with it. And then I talked about it again in my How to Distinguish Cute Girls anime video, where I like really talked about how much I like the three main characters of this show. And I started to become worried back when I was making that video, because the first 3 episodes were out. And episode 3 was a bad omen, and it kind of foretold exactly what the problem was going to be for this entire show, which is that it barely ever focuses on its 3 main characters. It establishes these 3 very strong comedic personalities that have interesting, character facets. Like, I liked their personalities, I liked the way they played off of each other and everything, but then almost every episode was about a side character, a random supporting character. And the supporting characters are totally one note. Each one is like, here's their gimmick, they show up, and that's the joke for that part of the episode. And, like, that just is most of the show. It'd be like, this one's going to be about the blue-haired kid who's mad because the brown-haired girl keeps beating him at Futaba Odagiri. I know that because he screams her name all the time. He's mad at Futaba Odagiri because she keeps beating him at eating contests. And, like, an episode where he's the joke, like, the first time he shows up, it already kind of gets old, because that's all he is. That's his whole character, is that he's mad at her for beating him at eating contests. And then he keeps showing up, and the joke is always the same thing. And, like, that's what most of the show is. It's just really repetitive jokes with these, like, one-note side characters. And it's, like, such a waste of potential. I mean, overall, the show is solid. I would give it a strong 6 to a light 7. I'd put it, not as good as My Hero Academia, but it's on the, or I think I put it a little above Mayoiga, or like neck and neck, or this is another show that has a lot of elements I really like. I love the animation. I think, they went all out on animating it. I'm not super into the character designs, but I generally like the personality of the show. And I feel like it had a lot of heart, but then it didn't do anything with its best elements, which are the 3 main characters. And then when I later, like, watched Bakuan, which I'll be talking about in a bit, like, that show perfectly nailed what this show failed at, which was focusing entirely on its central cast. There's almost no, like, there's like maybe 4 important side characters in Bakuan, and they're all very, like, toned down, and you only see them every once in a while. There's no minor character who's there, like, every episode, or who has a whole episode dedicated to them. They're just, side characters. They're there in the background. Whereas in Sansha Sanyou, it's like, you've got the 3 girls hanging out, having a good time, and then here comes wacky, what's her name? The girl voiced by Shintani Ryoko, I think. And she's just like, oh, I'm here, I'm wacky, and it's like, oh, God, and now it's all about her, so, yeah, overall, I'd say this show was a good time, but it really did not meet the potential of the early episodes. If I had gone into the show, like, with the expectation that it was going to be as good as it was the whole time, I don't know if I actually would have finished it. Like, I don't know if I would have, if episode 1 was only as good as the rest of the show, I probably would have had much lower expectations and been like, I don't know. It had a great start, but it just really didn't capitalize on its good parts.
Could we possibly keep this gravy train a-rolling 5 nights in a row? Let's find out. 14. That's Bungou Stray Dogs. Well, it'll be worth a shot. Well, episode 2 of Bungou Stray Dogs was pretty boring and trite, and I didn't really care for any of the characters, and I couldn't see caring for them going forward. So we're just going to drop that show after episode 2 and continue with this 8. Looks like I already did 8. 19. That's Kuma Miko. Now, I was thinking about dropping this anyways because of its hilariously infamous ending, but I figure I'll at least give a few more episodes a shot, or at least, 1, and see how I feel. Well, I watched episode 2 of Kuma Miko, and honestly, like, knowing how the show ends kind of makes the entire presentation of it just feel really off-putting, and the message that it's trying to send seems really fucking weird. But more importantly, I also just don't really like the characters. I don't really find the Miko or the Kuma to be likable at all, and I also didn't find it funny. I didn't laugh at anything in episode 2, so I just kind of got bored and was really off put and gave up. So we're gonna go to the next show. 10. That's Kanojo to Kanojo no Neko. I don't know much about this one. I don't think I've seen any of it, and also I spelled it wrong. Could have probably noticed that a long time ago. So let's give it a shot. Alright, well, I watched one of the 7.5-minute episodes of that, and it was fucking boring and lame, which is not too surprising because I felt the same way about the original Makoto Shinkai short film. I don't give a fuck about cats. Alright, what's next? No! No, it wasn't supposed to be like this! This wasn't supposed to happen! Well, you know, I put this in as a joke, and I think I did it slightly before I realized that the show was 26 episodes and not actually over yet. So, I'm just gonna take it off. We can do that. We can do that once the show's over, alright? We can do that later. We can do that later. Alright, well, I was gonna just end the video after that last thing happened, but then I finally recorded my bit for Sakamoto and decided to make that its own video, so this one would be shorter, and now I have space for another one, so let's do a thing. 19, I think that's what I rolled before. 30, that's been rolled. 27, that's been rolled. 14, that has also been rolled. 32 has been rolled. I don't know why I even put 32 as the upper limit again. 10 has been rolled. Come on now. 10 again. Jesus. 4. Rakugo Shinjuu. Oh my god, I'm finally gonna watch it. Holy shit. So, Shouwa Genroku Rakugo Shinjuu. I finally finished it after talking it up so much over the last few months. I guess the last 6 months since watching episodes 1 and 2. Which were phenomenal episodes, and this show is, overall, I think it's great, but I also think that episode 1 was so... this is the One Punch Man effect. I feel almost the same about this show as I do about One Punch Man, which was that the opening episode was like a short film that worked all on its own, and the rest of the show is good, but it feels like it's just kind of repeating the ideas you already understood in episode 1 and doesn't really go anywhere new. And occasionally it has sparks of something really interesting, but I don't think it really like keeps its momentum going. And that is the biggest problem I have. And the show's not as good as One Punch Man because that show's idea was so genius, whereas this one is just really well executed drama. The idea of following like Rakugo and these performers and just through their life story is a good idea, but it's not nearly as interesting as what One Punch Man presented or as hype and, you know, enjoyable to watch. So my overall feelings on this show is that it's like a strong 7, and that's sad for me because I really wanted it to be like a 9 because it was a show that, you know, it was so... It deserved so much, you know, that it didn't get. No one paid attention to it, even though it had by far the strongest start of the winter season. And, you know, I had fucking Jeff over here, Mother's Basement, telling me, like, that he thought it was... He said it was, like, one of his top 5 of the decade so far, you know? So, like... I kind of overhyped myself a little bit because I was like, man, Jeff thinks it's that, which I don't know why I listen to Jeff. I almost never agree with him on anything. None of our favorite shows are the same at all, which is really funny. But, like, I just kind of had this feeling, and, you know, my brother had watched it and he said it was great. He said it wasn't nearly as good as Jeff thought it would. And I was more inclined to listen to him, you know, but because Victor's tastes are way closer to mine. But, like, I just kind of wanted it to all be as good as episode 1, and it really isn't because it gets way too repetitive in the midsection. Because basically the story is, it starts off in, like, the 70s or 80s, like, showing you this story about this guy who gets out of jail, and he meets this old Rakugo master and, like, wants to learn from him, and you see this, like, whole enormous story unfold just in this first hour-long episode. And then the rest of the season is all the backstory of the old Rakugo master, which I didn't realize the whole fucking season was going to be that. So, like, a lot of the time I was like, okay,
when is his story going to end and we get back to the present? Because his story, his history didn't quite seem as interesting as the present. And like, I kind of was okay with learning that, like, this information along the way with whatever the present story was going to be. But it really just cuts out, like, that story from episode 1 doesn't matter at all until the very end of the show. And it's just telling you this guy's backstory, which I felt like I understood enough of it that there was no reason I needed a whole season to understand it. And like episode 2 is great. It establishes the friendship between him and this other guy. Episode 3 establishes them, like, their personalities and what they go through. And then almost the entire season is like, the one guy is a drunk and a fuck up, and the other guy is stoic and hasn't figured out his craft completely. And that's, like, it just keeps running through the same circle over and over again, where there's like 5 different scenes where the one dude stumbles into the other guy's apartment and it's like, I'm drunk and fucked up. And he's like, you need to stop drinking and focus on your Rakugo. And he's like, I'm a fuck up. And the other guy's like, yeah, but you're a genius at Rakugo, so no one can do anything about it. And that's like the whole show in the middle. And then finally at the end, it almost feels sudden when it just becomes dramatic and gets into, like, wraps up that arc. Because it feels like you spend so long just going through the motions of the same thing, and then all of a sudden everything changes very rapidly, and it, like, moves through all these different things at the end, which was a good pace to handle those things, but it was weird that the whole midsection took so long to get to this point where things are happening again, you know? And then once it's all over, I was really left with the sense, like, that didn't need to be 12 episodes. Like, that could have been 6 or 7 episodes and communicated all the same points. And then we could have gotten into this new story. Whereas, like, at the end of season 1, because they announce a season 2 at the end. And at the end, it goes back to the present, and it, like, reintroduces the characters from episode 1. And I didn't even remember who they are at this point. I was like, I don't remember what these guys were up to, like, what points in life they were at, like, what they were going through. Like, I barely remember them because they haven't been here the whole show. So, I mean, I'm still looking forward to season 2, and I hope that the next story will be, you know, more interesting than the first one. Maybe not have to take a whole season to make a point that could have been made much quicker, you know. I don't know how this was handled in the manga, if maybe they added stuff in or what, but it definitely got tiring in the middle. And so even though I thought the characters were all really strong, the drama was really strong, the way it was presented was really strong, every Rakugo scene was hype, you know, there was a lot of big emotions, big emotional moments. I would have liked it a little more if the way that the situation resolves in the last episodes isn't that the characters are just irrational. Even though there's good reason for them to act the way they do, ultimately it's like irrationality is why why the events play out the way they do, which is always kind of lame from a storytelling perspective, just because, like, you can make irrational characters do anything. You know, I feel like stories feel better when they have a strong logic behind them, but the world's not always rational, and the reasons given for the characters to act irrationally was good enough that it didn't bother me that much. It was just kind of like oh, I guess that's what happened. They were dumb like, at the end, you know. Again, wouldn't have been a problem if it didn't take a whole season to get there. If it had been like 7 episodes of this backstory, I think it would have been much more fitting for the kind of story that it was. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. The point being that it's a good show that I think lags too much in the middle, doesn't present enough different ideas, and kind of cuts off at a point where it doesn't feel that satisfying, where it's like, maybe season 2 will make up for this, and maybe it'll be able to, you know, tell a story that gives more weight to what we saw before. But in the end, I kind of was left feeling like I had, you know, hadn't really seen enough intrigue to justify the amount of time I'd spent on it.